And welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Glad you're with us. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues, and this one comes with a tinge of controversy.
Indeed it does. The Ten Commandments. The legislature did pass and the governor did sign a bill authorizing the placement of a memorial naming the Ten Commandments at the Capitol grounds, not without significant controversy, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
It had already been done in Texas, but it played out again at the legislature in Oklahoma City. We're going to have a couple of guests today to discuss each side of that argument. Is it a wise idea or not? That's subject today on The Verdict.
Every day America uses clean-burning natural gas instead of coal or oil is a day of victory for our environment. That's why Chesapeake chose to explore for natural gas exclusively, and we've never looked back. Because natural gas burns twice as clean as oil or coal, and reducing carbon emissions to combat potential global warming is every bit as urgent as cutting our dependence on energy imports. As America's #1 driller of new gas wells, Chesapeake is moving fast to find untapped reserves of natural gas here at home. It's the right fuel for America's economy and the fuel for a clean air future. We just happen to be early to see it so clearly. Chesapeake, natural gas wins the day.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guests.
Today we have two very interesting guests going to talk about the Ten Commandments monument at the state capitol, which is upcoming, been passed by the legislature. To my right is Dr. Bruce Prescott. Dr. Prescott is the executive director of Mainstream Baptist. He did his undergraduate work at the University of Albuquerque, his master's and PhD studies at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He has a radio talk show. He's a radio talk show host on KREF on the religious subjects. His show airs at 10 a.m. on Sundays, so after you watch us at 9 a.m. on Sundays, you can turn on KREF and listen to Dr. Prescott finish up the morning. He is an adjunct professor at Phillips Theological Seminary, served on the Oklahoma Conference of Churches. His first visit to The Verdict, Dr. Prescott, welcome.
Thank you.
To my left is probably a face that's familiar to many Oklahomans. We have a lot of Oklahoma State viewers watch this show, as Pastor Paul Blair. He's a senior pastor at the Fairview Baptist Church in Edmond. Of course, as many of you know, he was a 3-year starter for Oklahoma State University, then played 5 years in the NFL for the Chicago Bears. is the founder and chairman of Reclaiming Oklahoma for Christ, and he calls himself, as well as others, as a patriot pastor. Paul, welcome to The Verdict.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you.
The Oklahoma legislature recently passed House Bill 1330. It provides for the construction on the state capitol grounds a monument displaying the 10 Commandments. Paul, good idea or bad idea?
Well, I think it's a good idea. The only reason a person could be opposed to having a monument with the 10 Commandments out on our Capitol grounds is either one, you disagree with the idea that our country had a very Christian basis and Christian heritage with Christian founding fathers, or you disagree with what the 10 Commandments have to say. I happen to support both of those things, so I'm very excited to see that the state legislature put this bill forward, that it passed, and it was signed into law.
Dr. Prescott?
Well, I have to say that with every fiber of my being, I am convicted that it's profane. Now, to understand that, you have to understand what the Supreme Court has said about the 10 Commandments monuments. The Supreme Court has taken a sacred oath and covenant and turned it into a symbol of profanity. Now, what they said when they ruled on the case in Kentucky, the McCreary case, they said that that was unconstitutional because it had a religious purpose and significance. They said the one in Texas was legal because it had a secular purpose. Now, first of all, the Supreme Court has no authority to interpret Scripture or pass judgment upon its meaning. And secondly, when the Supreme Court says that it has to have a secular purpose, what it's doing is taking a sacred oath and covenant between God and His people and changing its meaning. They have no right to do that. Finally, these monuments all have the name of God chiseled in stone on them. And it says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." And when the Supreme Court says that the reason why what makes it legal is the fact that those words have no meaning and significance, it violates the very command. To take the name of the Lord thy God in vain is to take it lightly, without meaning or significance. So it's profane. It takes a very sacred oath and covenant and makes it a symbol of profanity.
Of all involved, I think the Supreme Court is the one that's unconstitutional here. I'd like to see some revision there. I've got a dear friend that is actually an expert on this. He has an organization out of Texas called Wall Builders. His name is David Barton, very gifted in that he has accumulated a library of over 100,000 original documents. So rather than reading a history book that was written 10 years ago that was based upon a history book that was written 20 years ago, he's got the original letters. I've seen many of them. Well, he's been called to testify before the United States Supreme Court on several different occasions. And in the early 90s, he was asked to testify on a case regarding prayer in school. And he showed tremendous amounts of evidence that proved that our founding fathers not only believed in prayer in school, but they themselves participated in prayer in school. And would you believe that one of the Supreme Court justices made the statement to him, well, either our founding fathers were hypocrites or they didn't understand the Constitution? Imagine, the guys that wrote the Constitution didn't understand what they were writing. Quite frankly, I think that's tremendous arrogance. We have forgotten where we've come from, and quite frankly, our judges on the Supreme Court have, I do agree with you as far as they, I think, in large part have lost their minds.
Let me jump in here just for a minute. And as I understand it, this House bill provided that basically the Texas monument, which has been approved, would be the one to be used at the state capitol. We have a picture of the Texas monument. Let's pull it up and take a look at it. Not that you can tell a lot about it, but that actually is the Texas monument that has passed muster at the Supreme Court. Paul, were you involved at all in the legislative activity or aware of it at the time it was going on?
Absolutely not. I know Mike Ritz, he's a friend. I'm a big fan of his, but quite frankly, I don't even take the newspaper anymore. And I wasn't even aware that this had passed until I probably heard about it maybe a week before you all had called and asked me to be on the show. So I wasn't aware that it was going through the process, but I was glad that it did.
Well, Doctor, you've heard Paul's explanations. Is the information he passed along, is that relevant to this case?
Well, I'm not sure that information is relevant, but I'll say this, okay? Instead of reading David Barton, reading any of these books, it would be much better if people would actually go and read the original documents themselves.
Amen.
Two documents I think are most pertinent. One of those is the Act for Religious Freedom by Thomas Jefferson in Virginia, which is one of the things that he was most proud of. And the other is Memorial and Remonstrance by James Madison, who's the author of the Constitution and the First Amendment of our Constitution. And I think anyone that would go to the library and ask if they could look at those, look them up online. I think anybody that read those would have an understanding that the intention and the desire for both of them was, along with what Baptists were at those days, was a separation of church and state that respected religious liberty for every person in this country, regardless of what their faith was.
If you mean a proper definition of separation of church and state, I would agree with you. America is not a theocracy and never has been a theocracy. And by the way, neither was Israel. There were two separate branches of government. There was the king and then there was the priesthood, but they both operated under the constitution of the same law. But what we have been told and taught over the last 50 or 60 years is an abomination of what the intent of the First Amendment was. And if you were to go and read from the Constitution the First Amendment, it's very clear that what the intent was with how it's being applied today is on opposite ends of the spectrum. I mean, it does not, the First Amendment was a handcuff. In fact, all 10 amendments were handcuffs placed upon the federal government, saying you stay within your realm of responsibility. And by the way, at the time of the signing of the Declaration, there were established churches. Let me explain what an established church was. An established church meant that there was an established state church. There was mandatory membership, mandatory tithe, mandatory attendance. Now, at the time of the signing of the Declaration, 9 colonies had established state churches. At the time of the signing of the Constitution, 6 colonies had established state churches. What the First Amendment said was, federal government, you stay out of this. We are not going to have a Church of England. There's not going to be a national Baptist denomination. There is religious freedom in America. However, 99.8% of our founding fathers were some sort of Christian, either Protestant or Catholic. So when they used the expression Christian and religion, it was almost synonymous with one another in their mind. If you were to ask Brother Prescott, what religion are you? He'd say, I'm a mainstream Baptist. If you were to ask me, what religion are you? And so on and so forth. It wasn't the idea of the New Age or things of that nature. It was, the religion was, hey, I'm a Presbyterian, or I'm a Catholic, or I'm a Methodist, or something along those lines. But there was to be no established state denominations with mandatory membership. That was state business, not the federal government's business.
Dr. Prescott, we're going to take a break and come back, and we'll give you the first shot coming out of the break on the other side. Take a deep breath. I can tell. Kent and I'll be back in a few moments with our guests, and we're discussing the 10 Commandments and the Oklahoma State Legislature's recent decision to place a monument on the grounds of the state capitol. We'll be right back.
From the first grade on, I knew I wanted to be an artist. That's all I ever thought about. I approach it much different than the normal weaver in that I look at my warp yarns, which are your base yarns, as a palette. That gives excitement to the cloth because you never know what you're going to get. I'm sure it's something I feel, not something I talk about a lot, the spiritual aspect of it, but it is there, it's below the surface, and it's guiding me. I feel very blessed to be a Chickasaw. I feel like I have just been given this heritage. It gives me a whole reason for doing the beadwork patterns in my weave structures. Seeing the Chickasaw tribe fostering art, using art, and how valuable it is to the tribe is inspirational. And the creative thought, it's in business, it's in economics. It's what gives us meaning, it's what gives us depth. It's what makes us see the beautiful of the world.
Home values are down in some states, but not in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home values have increased 4.2% during the past 12 months. Unlike some states where home values have decreased as much as 20%. Good thing you're in Oklahoma. There may be real estate problems in some states, but there has never been a better time than now to buy or sell a home in Oklahoma. One of the most affordable states in the country, Oklahomans are buying and selling homes every day, and an Oklahoma Realtor can show you how. Good thing you're in Oklahoma.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a plug nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
welcome back to the Set of the Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're discussing the Ten Commandments monument that will apparently soon be placed on the grounds of the state capitol. When we left, Pastor Paul Blair was going into the historical evidence as to why this was relevant, and Dr. Prescott, your response?
Well, what my response is, it sounded like what Paul was talking about was he assumed that what the founding fathers were trying to do is create a nation where the Christian religion was implicitly assumed to be the established church, and that is far from the truth. The real truth is that Baptists were the ones that were the chief advocates for religious liberty at that time. The jails of Virginia were filled with Baptist preachers who had been imprisoned for preaching the gospel without a license. But the Baptists were certain that they wanted religious liberty for more than just themselves, because they wanted to be able to share the gospel with people of all faiths. And they wanted to have a ground that they could do that. And what they did was they assured liberty of conscience for every person, and that was entirely what they were doing. That's why there was no religious test for public office. That's why they said that Congress shall not pass any laws respecting the establishment of any religion. That's why they wouldn't have put Jesus Christ in the Act for Religious Liberty in Virginia that Thomas Jefferson had there. He just had the idea that everyone would have liberty of conscience. So if you go back and you look, what you'll find was their real intention was to provide religious liberty for everyone. And that's the common ground that we all share of respect for one another here in this nation.
Let me ask you both this question. What is the real purpose of putting the monument on the state capitol grounds? Why do it?
Which one of us?
Start with you.
Okay, very good. Well, I wish we had an hour show because I'd love to respond. I agreed with about half of what he had to say, but the other half I'd like to take issue with.
Go ahead.
But what I hope takes place with this is two things. Number one, I hope it causes us to pause and reflect and look back at the foundation of this nation. That from the pilgrims that came over here in order to establish a colony for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, all the way through that Great Awakening, which is that great event that led to the unifying of 13 individual colonies that wouldn't tolerate each other and hated each other, to a nation under God that worked together in the fight and call for liberty, to the fact that we have Scripture, Leviticus 25:10 on our Liberty Bell. Do we have the Scripture on the walls of Congress, Scripture in the Library of Congress? I hope that this calls people to investigate and go back and look at the truly spiritual heritage of our nation. Not once are we a theocracy, and we are not calling to be a theocracy. However, we are established on the fundamental principles and precepts that are given in Scripture. You'll not find the idea of equality in the Quran.
What's the benefit of having the monument?
Well, number one, to remember who we are. I only brought one thing just to read from here, but John Adams said, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by religion and morality." He said our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And Woodrow Wilson, although I'm not a big fan of Woodrow Wilson, he made a great statement in a speech in Denver in 1911. He said, "A nation which does not remember what it was yesterday doesn't know what it is today or what it's trying to do." We're trying to do a futile thing if we don't know where we've come from or what we're about. He said America was born a Christian nation.
Dr. Prescott, what's the harm in having the monument on the state capitol grounds?
What it has done is it's taken a very sacred text and used it for profane purposes.
So you're offended by the idea for religious purposes, for religious reasons.
This is separation of church and state protects religion. It's offensive for the government to try to think that it can endorse or approve or disapprove of religious texts.
Should non-Christians be offended?
Non-Christians, some of them may well be offended. I think Christians should be offended. I don't think the government needs to be benevolently neutral in regard to religion. That's because what we want is a public square where we can share opinions, where we can find some way that we can share what we believe about the gospel and see that people will come to faith.
The U.S. Supreme Court, just generally through the years, seems to be leaning in your direction. And would you agree with that? And would you basically say the court is on the right path in this separation, their interpretation of the separation of church and state?
They're interpreting the Constitution, and the Constitution says Congress can pass no law respecting established religion. The 14th Amendment makes sure that that applies to the states. So you can't have an established faith, not a Christian faith, not a Muslim faith, not no faith. You just have benevolent neutrality in regard to the government.
Well, what about the argument, though, Paul, that the monument there would be of educational value to the citizens of Oklahoma, without regard to its religious
Well, that was the
significance.
second thing. It certainly has some great moral teachings, whether you're a Christian or non-Christian. I hope that people will stop and consider that chiseled in stone, the idea of honoring father and mother, the idea of thou shalt not commit murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery. You know, we took the Ten Commandments off our school walls after Stone v. Graham in 1980, and we took the Ten Commandments out and we've replaced them with metal detectors in our public schools. I hope that this causes people to stop and consider the heritage of this nation and the importance of our founding fathers. Recognize that you're either going to be governed from without through tyranny, a big stack of laws and guards with guns making sure you obey them, or to have true liberty. You have to be governed from within. That's why they stress the importance of religion and morality. And also hope that people will reflect on the teachings that's there, because whether you are a Christian or non-Christian or whatever, it certainly has some very positive life lessons.
A couple of minutes left in the show,
Religion
Dr.
is
Prescott.
not a utensil that the government can use to try to find a way to socialize its people. And I think what we have done is we have demeaned our faith when we think that some little monument on the Capitol grounds is going to find some way to instill values in people. What we need to do is find a way to proclaim it and live it, and not try to put a symbol up there which will be a substitute for our faith.
Well, when the Jews crossed over Jordan, the first thing they did was took 12 stones, placed them there as a monument, and the purpose was when the children saw those stones, they would say, "Dad, what are these stones for?" And they would tell them about God. I hope that this monument will serve as a starting point for people to begin the discussion. What was America founded on? Let's find the truth of our history. And these 10 things that are written down here, maybe we ought to peruse those and consider those. They might be good life lessons to apply to ourselves. So hopefully it will be beneficial.
They didn't chisel anything on the stones. They just put the stones there as a reminder.
The names of the tribes are written there, and then they were supposed to ask their dads, and their dads had the responsibility of explaining what the monument was there for. So.
Constitutionality of this, how do you expect this to turn out?
Well, I think what we'll have to do is observe and see what the excuses are. What you're seeing is secular arguments, so we're going to try to find some way to instill values on people. We're not going to use the religious message that's there, which profanes the religious text.
A prediction how the court will rule, though.
It's hard to know where the court is going to go. I would think that the court will rule against it.
Paul?
This is a secular argument only if you believe that Jonathan Mayhew and John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg and Whitefield were secularists. I believe they were some of the greatest preachers of all times, led in the greatest revival on history since Jerusalem, the Great Awakening. How do I believe? It is absolutely constitutional. You read the First Amendment and you tell me where this invokes an establishment of religion in America. It does not.
All right. I want to thank both of you for coming on the show and enlightening in so many different areas. Pastor Blair and Reverend Dr. Bruce Prescott, thank you very much for coming on The Verdict.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll be back with a final word right after this.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of the verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to the set of the verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and we are wrapping up a show with Paul Blair and Reverend Dr. Bruce Prescott discussing the recent state legislature decision to place a monument displaying the Ten Commandments on state capitol grounds.
Yes, it will be interesting to see how this plays out. Undoubtedly, there will be a legal challenge to the monument. There are certain tests the court has traditionally looked at to see whether or not those things pass muster or not, whether they violate the First Amendment about establishment or not. One is trying to determine the purpose, and that's one reason we were kind of wondering what these gentlemen would say about what's the purpose of the monument. That could very well determine the outcome of the case.
And Kent, the fact that there's one already on the grounds in Austin, is that relevant to the Oklahoma case?
Well, it's certainly relevant in some respects. Now, you got to keep in mind in that case that that was not challenged until after the monument had been in Austin for about 40 years, with a myriad of other types of similar monuments through a complete wide field of religion.
So it's not apples to apples.
It is not apples to apples.
From a legal standpoint.
No, the fact that it looks like the Texas monument and has the same words, of course, as the Texas monument does not mean that it will be okay because Texas was. We just don't know. It depends on what the purpose is.
Well, a lively show, no doubt. Kent and I'll be back with another show next week. We will see you then.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.